Welcome, everybody. My name is John Bentley. I'm a professor of pharmacy administration here at the University of Mississippi School of Pharmacy, and I'm here with one of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Mickey Smith. Dr. Mickey Smith, I'm going to let him talk a little bit about himself as we get started, but not only was he a colleague on the faculty with me, he was also my major professor when I was a graduate student here at the University of Mississippi in the Department of Pharmacy Administration. So it's an honor to conduct this interview with you, Dr. Smith. And let me just start by having you tell everybody a little bit about your background in terms of what your position was here at the School of Pharmacy before your retirement.
Be happy to do that, John. And let me tell the people watching that you're one of my best graduate students. So the Mutual Admiration Society is in process. I might say at the outset that I've spent many, many hours in the room that you're seeing, because this was always the faculty meeting room. Wasn't always fun, but I spent a lot of time here. And I was on the faculty at Ole Miss for 37 years and loved virtually every minute of it. There were a couple of minutes in this room that weren't much fun, but there you are. But I was delighted to be at the University of Mississippi for all that time. I've seen some great students come through here, and I'm just proud to be associated with the school even now. So here we are.
That's fantastic. And I know you've taught, I think you and I had talked about this at one point, 37 years, about 100 students per year. That's close to 4,000 pharmacists that you've interacted with over your career.
That's right.
That's pretty impressive. Well, let's just start with let's go back to the basics. Where are you from? Where were you born? Where did you start with, and where'd you go to pharmacy school? Because you are a pharmacist first and foremost. Tell us a little bit about that.
First and foremost, that's a proper phrase to use. Absolutely, I'm a pharmacist first. I have two professions, just as you do. One's pharmacy and one is professing. But I grew up in, if I ever grew up in Jefferson City, Missouri. Missouri, there are two different pronunciations depending on who you're talking to. Frankly, I had not chosen pharmacy as my future, but my father got me straightened out on that. He said, your Uncle Bill's a pharmacist and he's always got a good job and he makes pretty good money. And your whole idea of going to school and studying English literature is just foolish. So, and he was right, of course. And once I enrolled at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy, my alma mater, I bought into pharmacy big time. And it's been an integral part of my life forever after. I see pharmacy everywhere. I look for it. I enjoy it. And I'm just really thrilled with what I'm seeing happening in this profession. It's a fine, fine calling.
Very good. So you were influenced by an uncle who was a pharmacist, right?
Well, at a distance, yeah. He actually was practicing in Texas, but he was the first person in either side of the family to go to college. So everybody talked about him quite a bit. We didn't see much of him, but he was very successful in Texas and was kind of a role model, I guess you could say. When I went to, well, let me back up just for a minute. Once I decided to go to pharmacy school, I quit my job in journalism, which was actually selling newspapers on the street, and took a job in the drugstore. And that was my first real experience with pharmacy, although my personal experience was mostly as a soda jerk. And don't go there with that joke you're about to say. So, but
I was gonna bring up soda jerk in case you did. Can you tell the audience or those listening that term's not used anymore? So what is a soda jerk?
It's someone who stands behind a soda fountain, if that's used anymore, and makes ice cream sodas and malts, milkshakes, and that sort of thing. And many of the drugstores in that era had them. They still have some now. In fact, there's one down in Water Valley that I know about. But I didn't get much pharmacy per se out of that experience, but I did get an experience of the atmosphere in a drugstore. So it was good for me.
Well, you know, you and I have talked many, many times over the years, and one of my favorite stories in your development as both a pharmacist and as a professor was how you got to the University of Mississippi. So tell us a little bit about what led you here to the University of Mississippi and the influence that I know you want to talk a little bit about, and that's Charlie Hartman.
Yeah, that's good. Uh, I was working on a master's at my alma mater. They had just started a master's program, and I was considering a PhD program. Had an offer from Ohio State, but I also had a wife and one child by that time, and the offer just wasn't attractive enough. And I saw a poster on this college bulletin board from Ole Miss. I didn't know anything about Ole Miss, but I picked up the phone and cold called, and talked to the dean, Dean Hartman, Charles Hartman. Remember that name, those of you who haven't heard it. And it turned out that he was traveling with the senior class and coming through St. Louis on the way back from a trip to, I think, Eli Lilly and Company. And we, another fellow and I, arranged to meet him, and we did at midnight in the train station there. And I was sold. He was very charismatic, not physically imposing, but you just believed everything he said. And the next is pretty much history. Took my wife down for a visit to Oxford and met with the dean again, and I was hooked. This is where I wanted to go, and I did, and I'm glad I did.
So you did your PhD here at the
Yes,
University of Mississippi. What years were you here in graduate school?
was here for 2 years, from 1962 1964, and I might just elaborate on that for a minute or two. I immediately took a job in the drug industry with a small Swedish firm, small at that time, called Pharmacia. It's now part of Pfizer, but at that time it was very small. And we moved to New Jersey. And I knew a professor at Rutgers University that I met at a meeting. And my second year at Pharmacia, he asked me if I'd come and teach a course for them. And I'm very grateful to Pharmacia for letting me do that. I went up one morning a week for about 2 3 hours and taught a course in marketing, and that hooked me yet again to the classroom. I knew the idea of a bunch of people sitting there and listening to every word I said or close to it. It's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and I'm glad I did that. And the experience was excellent.
So you caught the teaching bug, as
Well,
I think you caught the teaching bug, as I think you told me once.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And one other sidelight too. One of the problems I had in teaching the course was there was not a textbook, and as you know, I just proceeded to write one, and it's been very successful in the early years.
Great information. I want to go back a little bit to when you were in graduate school here,
Mhm.
because if I recall right, you were the second ever pharmacy administration PhD here at the University of Mississippi. Is that correct?
That's correct. Gene Watkins was the first, and I was the second, and I think Dr. Barnard Keller was the third of
Okay.
that group.
So tell me a little bit about what it was like here and when you were a graduate student. I know you actually, even though you were in pharmacy administration, if I remember right, you taught in pharmaceutics lab and some other things as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I can't say I did it well, but it was part of the job. Uh, the program at that point was rather unstructured. Uh, Dean Hartman, who had no formal training in pharmacy administration, was my major professor, but he was very liberal in allowing me and other students to do other things around the university. I did a lot of work in sociology and a good bit in economics, and we had a fellow graduate student uh, named Hudson who went on. She wanted to do journalism, and Dean Hartman said, "Fine." Next thing you know, after she's got her PhD, she's editor of the Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences. So things happened well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm also as a student of pharmacy administration myself, and very interested in um, that time period because pharmacy administration really was about how to manage and own a drugstore.
Well,
And
that's how it started. It's
that's
true
how it
now.
started.
True
And
enough.
even during that time period was kind of like that. But you and some of your contemporaries really moved our discipline into some really scientific based inquiry.
Yeah, there were a handful of us around the country that saw more to pharmacy administration. In fact, some of my colleagues in other schools didn't call it that anymore, or don't call it that anymore. They call it
Mhm.
social and behavioral pharmacy or things of that nature. And it evolved. It didn't. It wasn't a revolution, but it evolved. We, I think that the faculty that were trying to see things down the road saw different things than had been in the past, and it's all worked out very well as far as I'm concerned.
Very good. So I want to ask you a few more questions about that, but just to put this into timeline and perspective. So you were at Pharmacia for 2 years in New Jersey,
Yeah,
and you came back on faculty in 1966. Is that right? Back to the University of
came back
Mississippi?
in '66, right after 2 years.
Okay. And so you were assistant professor, teaching, the graduate program started going. When did you become department chair? Because you were department chair for a number of years as well, right?
About 2 or 3 years later, as I recall, I don't have the specifics, but it wasn't long.
Okay.
The whole school was departmentalizing, and I say I was the obvious choice, mainly because I was the first person in the room. So, and Dean Hartman knew he didn't belong as department chairman in pharmacy administration.
Okay.
It worked out well.
So you
Go
were the
ahead.
first department chair then.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Tell me about, in your long-standing time as a researcher, do you have one or two research projects that you thought was the most fun that you ever did, or was the most interesting? Or I guess those aren't mutually exclusive. They could be the most fun and the most interesting, but either one of those. Can you think of a project that you did that you just say, wow, that was great work, and I'm proud of that work, and it's something that I really enjoyed working on?
Yeah, that's an easy one, and it was one of the very first things I got involved in. And it's going to sound foreign to the people now because it's so long ago. But we had a major contract with the Social Security Administration. They had a very visionary man up there named Don Rucker, who knew that sooner or later we were going to have drugs under Medicare, which we did not have at that time. And that sooner or later pharmacists were going to have to get paid for doing that. And so our project was to determine how to automate vendor claims. That's what we called it. In other words, the pharmacist claim for payment. And that was a big project and was a lot of fun. And I'm surrounded by good people who knew a lot more about it than I did. You know how good I am about automation. We needn't go there. But in any case, that's the big one as far as I'm concerned. And one other thing that I think it did for us, in a school where most of the major grants were in the laboratory sciences, for once we had something serious down here in pharmacy administration, and we spent about $300,000 of Uncle Sam's money on that project.
That's fascinating. I think it's good for people to know that at that time, almost everybody paid for their prescriptions with cash.
Exactly.
There was no vendors, as you call them, or third-party contracts or insurance companies that paid for prescription medications.
That's right. The Medicaid program had prescriptions pretty early, but it took a long time for Medicare to do that.
Yeah,
as it does now.
Wow, that is some fascinating stuff. Tell me about a little bit about your teaching, because we got some potential pharmacy students listening to this. What did you teach in the pharmacy program, and what did you most enjoy about teaching pharmacy students?
Well, you know very well the answer to that because you were my teaching assistant for a number of times. I taught the orientation course, the first course that the students had in the professional program. And I loved it. And I particularly enjoyed it because I felt like I had a chance to give them a heads up on what they were getting into right off the bat. Now, of course, a lot of them already knew because they had parents and uncles, as I did, other people that they could relate to, but many did not. And they were going into a field that perhaps they knew not very much about, but I took very seriously my role of getting them oriented, as you might say.
Yes, I was your teaching assistant, and you mentioned that they often had parents. I still remember the time when you taught a student who you actually taught his grandparent once as well.
I knew you were going to bring that up. Kind of makes you think about how old you are, that's for sure.
Well,
yeah, it did happen.
And you had a long and productive, successful career. So it's at one place, which is unusual nowadays. And yeah, you get the opportunity to see children of people you taught before coming through pharmacy, and in your case, a grandchild. But in your defense, that was somebody who came through initially on the GI Bill and was a little older when they went to pharmacy school initially. So
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people that are seeing this chat do have parents that I taught, or perhaps even grandparents. Wouldn't be surprising at this point in time.
Absolutely. Um, just a little bit. So so that was in pharmacy school. What about graduate education? What did you teach graduate students in pharmacy administration?
Wow. I don't remember what I taught in graduate school. Well, we taught a whole range of social science related things. And I taught advanced drug marketing on a regular basis for sure. That was sort of my niche in the graduate program.
And I think that is probably what you are internationally known for is pharmaceutical marketing. Several textbooks in that area that have been translated into several different languages, which really leads me to my next. I do want to go back to your pharmacy school teaching a little bit later, but I do want to delve into this topic, which is the fact that you have a new book coming out, right?
Oh, yes. It's funny you should mention. I just happen to have a little flyer here about my new book, which I just received this week. Government, Big Pharma, and the People, A Century of Dis-ease. And it's coming out 3 weeks, I think, now. So, yeah, I'm very happy with that. I've had a lot of good people help me on that book.
Well, I actually like how you put dis-ease, because if you take the hyphen out in lowercase the e, it's disease. So I thought that was a great play on words in that title too.
I was happy with that.
But a couple things before I ask you a little bit more about that book. Number one is I'm not going to say how old you are, but let's just say you're a little older than me. And I hope when I'm your age and I get to be your age that A, I can still read at that point, and B, to write a book, I just think is simply outstanding. And I loved watching you in the process of putting this book together, because you spent a good bit of time in Phaser, and we were there watching you, and it was like seeing the old Mickey Smith. It was fun to see. But tell us a little bit about what this book does and what sets the stage. What's it about?
Well, it's, as the title says, it's about the government, Big Pharma, and the people. And what I try to do, I'll give you one minute background, which I left out of a little report that I gave you about the book. I had collected over the years proceedings of congressional hearings, had dozens of volumes of them, and I had some at home, and we had some over here in the department. And shortly after my wife passed away, I was cleaning out some things, and I saw all these books, and I said, "What have you done with those?" And I hadn't done anything with them. And so that's where I started, was what did the government do and think about the drug industry? And I'd heard it, but I hadn't seen it in proceedings. And that's what moved me into it. And then it just kind of grew after that.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to it. I think I told you this. I've already pre-ordered my book on Amazon. So,
Yes.
and
bookstores everywhere.
Bookstores everywhere, and I will be over to get my my first edition autograph too. So stay tuned for that.
Be my honor.
So one of my other favorite memories about TAing for you, well, there's two. One is you always started every class with a quotation. And I didn't say quote, I said quotation.
I know.
You started every class with a quotation, and it oftentimes tied into the topic of the day. Didn't always. Sometimes they were just kind of, I'm not going to use random, because as a statistician, I can't use that in this context, but certainly they were sometimes just related to life in general. So that was one. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, can you share one or two of your most favorite quotes with us?
I can tell you one off quickly.
Okay.
And it's from Shakespeare. And Shakespeare wrote, "Striving to better, oft we mar what's well." And I wrote that on the blackboard. And I asked the class, is there anyone here who can put that into contemporary language? And one guy in the back raised his hand and said, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And I thought that was wonderful. Just wonderful, and perfect as well. Yeah.
So that's one. And the other is, I know you have a love of literature, and you were on your way to having an English degree before you shifted into pharmacy. And one of the things that I also liked about your class is you had a whole class on famous pharmacists. And some of those were famous that they weren't real, they were in the literature, but other times they were real famous people who were pharmacists by initial training and led different lives and went down a different pathway. Can you share with the audience, because I think it's good for them to hear, especially people who are thinking about going into pharmacy, who some of these famous either fictional or non-fictional pharmacists were?
Well, I can, and I'll start, since yesterday was election day, I'll start with the political one. Hubert Humphrey was Vice President of the United States, and he was indeed a pharmacist. And more importantly, he co-sponsored a major piece of legislation which affects pharmacy practice today, the Durham-Humphrey Amendment. It's the one that created legend drugs, which means there is a class, as everybody knows, of drugs that you can't get without a prescription. And that was 1951, which sounds like a long time ago, but we waited a long time to get it. But I know what you're really after is some of the other ones. And one of them that is top of my list is Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie, I think, is well known to anybody, even if they don't read mysteries. And I've read someplace that the only literature that's sold more than Agatha Christie's books have been the Bible and Shakespeare. So she did pretty well for herself. And she did practice. She practiced hospital pharmacy during World War I. Another famous pharmacist was O. Henry, the short story writer. Most people have had to be exposed to him over the days, and he practiced too. He practiced until he started making enough money to live by his writing. So there are big names around, and I've mentioned to you, and I'll mention to the people that are watching, the pharmacist appears often in the literature, and I'll mention Romeo and Juliet. If you had to read that when you were in school, you may remember the apothecary. Romeo went there and bought poison, which was against the law. And the pharmacist was pretty well poverty stricken, and he meant the rules to do it. And I still remember, well, because I refreshed my memory, that Romeo said to him, well, you're not breaking any laws and you're not doing anything immoral except taking my money. So that didn't come out too well. And then one other quickie, two quickies. John Wayne played a pharmacist in the movies. Most people don't know that. Movie called In Old California. But most everybody sooner or later will see It's a Wonderful Life sometime during the holidays. It's not a very attractive picture of the pharmacist in that one, but he's pretty well known because he was drunk and had lost his son in the war and was in mourning. But he's a pharmacist that we've all seen, I think, over the years. Not one of the better portrayals, I'm afraid. But they're out there.
Absolutely. It's fun again, I think that was, I still have a file, because I think I eventually gave that lecture when you were on sabbatical. I actually taught the course that you had developed and taught for years. And I took your file for that. And that was one of my favorite things in pharmacy school, was sitting in that lecture about famous pharmacists. And this was in the days where we had overhead projectors, and
Right.
you had acetates, I think they were called, overheads of various pictures of people. And I still remember that well. It was a great lecture, and good to know a little bit about the history of the profession we're entering into.
You can find pharmacists everywhere if you look, and I always look. I read a lot of good nonfiction, but mostly mystery stories and thrillers and that sort of thing. And pharmacists are everywhere, just as they are in real life. They're just very much a part of the fabric of the public domain, I guess you could call it.
Well, which leads me into another topic, and you mentioned your wife Mary, and
Yeah.
and I know the two of you traveled extensively. So this is a two-part question. Mary was a nurse, and you actually you two collaborated together on a couple manuscripts. So
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about Mary and the impact she's had on your life, and the role of maybe pharmacy and nursing together. You guys were an interprofessional relationship, interprofessional activities happening right there in your own marriage.
Yeah, I'm delighted to talk about Mary. She was an extraordinary woman. We met on a blind date, actually, put together by friends of ours who were respectively pharmacists and nurses themselves. We had 58 years together, and she put up with a great deal of travel on my part. and mentored me a lot in I think when she went to nursing school, she left with every word anybody ever told her, because she could dredge up things from her lectures, not like nothing like I could do, or like nothing I could do. But you mentioned the travel. Yeah,
Mhm.
we really loved it. We went to traveled to 100 different countries over the years, and I have a collection of pictures at home, because every place we went, I went in a pharmacy someplace
Mhm.
to see what it was like. We got pictures of some of them, had some nice chats with some of them, and I just carried pharmacy with me everywhere, of course, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun, and we had a good time.
And that led to some international collaborations as well, and some people who came over here to visit and study
Absolutely,
with you as well.
absolutely. We had a number of visitors here in the department uh, over the years from Australia, Gibraltar, England, uh, Japan, China. So yeah, I had a good uh, relationship with a number of people internationally, and it led to some good things for me. I got to speak in Beijing and speak in Tokyo, Sydney, Australia. So that was a pretty good deal, good side effect. And I might add, since we were talking about my wife, she went every place I went, believe me.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I guess the other thing that's important for the audience to know is all of that international collaboration and work was done before we had the opportunity to do stuff like this. So
yes,
that was handwritten letters and perhaps phone calls, but generally handwritten notes, typed up letters, and visits as well, live visits too. So it was a different time for you back then.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. I did a sabbatical. My first sabbatical was in England. We spent 6 months in University back, and I used to record things on a little handheld recorder and mail it back so my secretary back home could do correspondence for me. So things were a little more cumbersome in those days, that's for sure.
Wow.
Good point, though. Good point.
Interesting.
No
Well,
email.
no email. No. I still remember when you first started working on email, but we won't go there.
That's no good. Not a happy place.
So, but now I got to tell you, you are a prolific user of email. I get at least an email a week from you.
I do use it a lot now. I resisted it at first, but I finally gave in.
Oh, that is
I'm
wonderful.
not sure about this Facebook stuff, though.
Me either. Me
I
either.
know you don't do it either.
That
Not
is
really.
right.
Not
So,
really.
just a couple of more general questions. So, um, so we're talking about pharmacy here. So, what is one thing that you love the most about pharmacy?
The people, the patients, if they were patients, customers, whatever one calls them. That when I was practicing, I loved the people that came in the pharmacy, chance to meet them, get to know them. Always, all of my practice was in a neighborhood kind of setting, so that you did get to know the people well. Not quite as easy, I guess, today in a chain store setting, but it was the people and the patients that was it. That was it for me. And I look forward to going to practice every day when I was doing that. And I missed that a little bit, but I made a nice trade-off in going into teaching.
And I think that if I remember right, you're going to have to correct me on this, but you used to have that. I think you called it a potential motto for pharmacy, which was something like "pharmacy helping you help yourself." Is
Yes,
is that
it,
is
wa-
that
it was
right?
a
A
position.
position statement, right?
Yeah, there was a book, I know you know about it, called Positioning the Battle for Your Mind. And it explains how uh, any kind of a marketing procedure can can position itself. They used in the book NyQuil, which positioned itself as the nighttime cold remedy. Well, that was a great position that nobody else had. And my position for pharmacy, and I still think it's good, was your pharmacist helping you take care of yourself. That's what pharmacists do. And nobody else does that, because the pharmacy allows you to do a lot of taking care of yourself with non-prescription drugs and that sort of thing. The other thing, I just need to throw this in. I am so impressed with some of the steps that pharmacies taking nowadays, specialty pharmacies, back to compounding, at the patient's bedside, all those things are really impressive and augur well for the future. So those of you that might be out there considering pharmacy, you can't do better than that.
Well, that leads me to this last question that I have, and then I'm going to turn it back to you for a more general closing comment. But what advice would you have for people thinking about either coming into pharmacy? So these may be high school seniors or people working in their first couple of years as an undergraduate. What advice would you have for somebody who's just becoming, thinking about entering into the profession? What would you tell them?
First thing is research it as much as you can. Look into it. Find out what your options are, that in terms of which place to go to study, and what options there might be when you graduate, because the options are growing like crazy. I ended up writing and teaching, but there are pharmacists doing all kinds of things that they never did before. And I mentioned specialty pharmacies and clinical pharmacy in the hospital. The other thing I would recommend, if you're listening and don't know any pharmacists, go find some of them. You're bound to have contact with them. Ask them about it. Most pharmacists would love to, encourage you, I guess, and educate you on what pharmacy means to them. So do your homework.
I'm assuming that advice translates to prospective PhD students in pharmacy administration. Would you have any different advice for them?
I have the same thing. Find out what it's about, find out what options you have, because pharmacy administration has an incredible range of options, as you know better than I do nowadays. Research, industry, teaching, all those things, third-party payment programs. There are just a whole range of things that one can do with a pharmacy administration degree, and the time couldn't be better for that. So encourage, same kind of thing though. Find out everything you can about it, and then come talk to John Bentley.
Absolutely. So I always like to end interviews like this. Are there any questions that I didn't ask that you wished I had asked you? Is there anything that I've left out? Anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't cover?
Well, I honestly can't think of anything. I think we've covered a lot of things. You've given me a lot of latitude in answering your questions. I'm going a little further afield than perhaps you had in mind, but it's been a good experience talking with you, John. And first time we've ever talked like this in a Zoom. We've talked plenty in other ways. Anyway, let me tell the rest of the audience that this gentleman who's been asking the questions and leading my comments is as good as they get. And if you're thinking about pharmacy administration, go talk to John Bentley.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Mickey.
All right. I'm Mickey Smith, and I approve this message.
I guess that's a good time right now, 2 days after the election in 2020, to say something like that. Yeah. So, well, I appreciate your time. It's been just a pleasure talking with you as always. And not only is this our first time on Zoom, I think, while I've asked you lots of questions over the years, I don't think I've ever done an interview like this with you.
No, you have not, to my knowledge. No.
So this was a lot of fun. I hope it helps out prospective students, both prospective pharmacy students and prospective graduate students. And like Dr. Smith says, if there are questions that you have about pharmacy administration, certainly reach out to me. If there are questions about the history of this school and where we have been and where pharmacy might be going, or how government, big pharma, and the people interact, I'm sure he'd be
well done.
I'm sure he'd be more than willing to answer your questions. So thank you very much, everybody. And again, pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Smith.
You too. Absolutely.